Our final speaker is Clarence. Clarence was a councillor in Central Saanich from 1990 to 93. He was chair of planning and zoning. He's been a member of many teams organizing municipal election campaigns. He's been chair and still is chair of the Board of Variance in Sydney, but has also done that in Central Saanich and North Saanich. He is a historian focusing on BC history and particularly Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations. He's the co-chair of the Sydney North Saanich RCMP Community Consultative Committee. His topic is, once elected, what's it like to be a municipal councillor? What's the role? What's your responsibility? And how much power do you have? Clarence.
Just one correction. I'm not the chair of Board of Variance in Sydney. My topic is about what happens once you get elected to council. And I can recall my first council meeting. There were 7 of us sitting around a table and thinking, my goodness, I have power, and we have power. And we have 3 years to make decisions that can define our community's future. And then I thought a bit more, it's not 7 of us, but it's only 4 of us have that power, if it works in certain ways. In other words, a majority of council, it only takes 4, it doesn't take 7. And then there was something else I realized very quickly. The mayor has no more power than I do. Of course, council's power is not unlimited. As Mona said, local government power is defined by provincial legislation. The province is the boss of municipalities and local government. But municipalities have one key area of power, and that's land use. And with their control over land use, they can shape how a community will look, its character, its feel, its mood, and so forth. In other words, council's real power is land use. But again, council has 2 limitations. They're required to follow rules that the province has defined. The first rule is official community plans. And official community plans set out in a general way what vision there is for the community and the goals for land use. There's a second set of rules, and that's zoning bylaws. And zoning bylaws are bylaws that make very specific what the OCP says in general. And the specifics are about how every piece of land in Sydney can be used. In other words, the type of buildings, the heights, the size, the setbacks, the density, the activities that are allowed on them or not allowed on them, and so forth. So, no land use decision by council can be made without reference to the OCP and the zoning bylaw. In other words, you can't violate them. Now, however, there's always a however here. I learned also while I was on council, despite what I just said about the rules that council must follow, legally they have to follow the OCP and zoning bylaws, but they can also do whatever they want, really. And how is that possible? It's possible not by ignoring the OCP, not by ignoring zoning bylaw, but simply by amending them. And they can amend them at will. Or they can pass variances to the zoning bylaw. That's a whole other discussion. There was a second realization, and that is that amending OCP and zoning bylaws require public input. They require public hearings. But councils don't have to pay attention to what the public says. They can ignore them entirely. Not only can they ignore them, but they don't even have to give reasons for their decisions. In fact, they don't have to say anything at all. And that makes things sometimes very disappointing for residents. So what I want to do just for the last minute or so is talk about my reaction to that experience of being on council, but also to the experience of watching councils. And I think there are a number of things that communities deserve from a council. And the first thing, and I think perhaps if you would say one thing, what communities deserve from council is respect. Or most residents know very little about the rules which govern councils. They know very little about how decisions are made. I think most residents also want to feel comfortable in their communities. They want to feel secure about where they live. We don't like surprises. And therefore, I think if you want to run for council, this is my suggestion for how you can be a good councillor. And there is a two-way street involved here that I think residents have a responsibility too. But I'm talking from the perspective of council. I think councils have to educate their residents. And councils have a responsibility to make residents aware of how OCP, official community plans, and zoning bylaws work. Why we have stores, schools, family residences, condos, industries, parks, etc., where they are. Why are they where they are and not somewhere else? Secondly, council is responsible to make sure that residents understand procedures and bylaws so that people know how they can be involved. Third, I think council should hold town hall meetings. I think they should hold workshops, open houses, and formats can vary, where people can meet and talk to each other. I think there are times where councils are very reluctant to have people actually meet each other and discuss commonalities. There's a divide and conquer approach that I've noticed in the last couple decades especially. Open houses don't facilitate communication very easily. Fourth, developers should be required to consult neighborhoods about proposals. We can all learn from each other. Developers can learn from us and we can learn from developers. And fifth, because councillors don't all speak on the same page on all issues, I think they should openly discuss and debate their positions. In other words, we should know differences of opinions from council. They represent the community. There are differences of opinions in the community. That will be reflected on council. In other words, I think we should be aware of why there are those differences and how they resolve those differences, the discussion that councillors have, so residents can understand how decisions are made and why they're made. In short, end up with this, there are three things that I think communities are best served with when residents are respected. Secondly, when residents are empowered to be knowledgeable, in other words, they're educated through council, but also through themselves. And thirdly, I think what's important is communication between residents and council. So respect, knowledge, and communication. Those are my three. Thank you.
There's a set of guidelines for a new council.